It's not pulling from the GraphQL endpoint, but I just grabbed some stuff from that and put it in here, so we actually have some stuff. Actually, I didn't try that. Yeah, okay, that works. So you can pull that in. You'll have to run npm install again, since I added Moment for this, Moment.js, but now we have some real data, because we want to start populating the actual details screen with the real stuff. So let's do that before we add tabs. So navigate. So when we navigate, let's pass in the item. And in our event details screen, now we know we have access to the item. As I said before, it's on this.props.navigation.state.params. So it's, yeah, it's just a thing you remember. So we have access to that there now. We can go ahead and say item.title here. Right, so we have what I learned, blah, 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 blah. And the other stuff. I'll leave it as an exercise to do the actual part for the speaker, I think, because there can be multiple speakers for a talk, and that's just pointless for me to demonstrate how to do that, as that's just programming without anything related to React Native. But as you can see, we actually have some real data coming in here. As for the date, you can also format that if you want. I'm just going to put it in the format that they gave it to us, which is, there you go. You can also just check out later when I send the full code that isn't just coded here on stage. I have that properly showing up. I did not do the multiple speakers thing. That's up to you if you want to do that. OK, so we have these screens connected, right? We're navigating to event details, passing in the item as a param, and then pulling that out of this.props.navigation.state.params, and then just using it in our view. Any questions about that? So this.props.navigation.navigate, event details, and then we pass in the item as the param in the second thing. And you can pass in any arbitrary object that you want there. OK. Before we make that look nicer, let's move on to tabs. I'm just going to save this so we have a clean diff. Let's just say use some of the event data on the detail screen. So if we go back up to app, right now we just have a schedule stack. So I'm going to add another stack. It's only going to have one screen in it, but we might add some other screens in the future. So let's add feedback stack, stack navigator, and we'll just call it feedback form screen, feedback screen. And we don't really care about any other configuration on that. But of course, that doesn't do us much good because we have no way of getting to this stack. So this is where we pull in the tab navigator, as we saw before. And now we can say app navigation or something like that. It's a common name to call it something like that, or root navigation, if it's like the main top-level navigation component for your app. So we can do app navigation is tab navigator. And then we'll add schedule as schedule stack. and feedback stack. And now we just render app navigation here instead. All right, so we can go to the feedback screen and go back to the schedule. So if I push something here, we can still go to feedback, come back here as expected. Doesn't look great yet though. So before we get into that, are there any questions? Again, I know we've gone over Tab Navigator like once before, very briefly, but I mean, this is the heart of really what's happening here. We're defining stacks, we're saying what screens are in those stacks, and then using different types of navigators, such as Tab Navigator, to group those stacks together. There's also a drawer navigator, which I'd encourage you to play with later if you have some time. It just gives you the swiping from the side, like navigation drawer type thing. Okay, let's fix the most blatant problem right now, which is that we created a navigation bar from scratch on the feedback screen just to try it out. But we don't really need that anymore. We can just delete it and use built-in navigation bar. So let's go back to the feedback screen. And our nav bar can go away. And in addition to that, we can get rid of this padding top. We can keep a little bit just so there's some space between the navigation bar and the feedback. Let's define some navigation options, which, as you remember, is how you configure some options for the screen. You might want to make like a container component that contains like your navigation options, and maybe if you're using like Apollo or Redux or whatever that does your connect function and feeds the data into like feedback as like a dumb component. In this case, we're just putting navigation options just directly onto this component. But yeah, we're not intending here to teach you about how to really organize React apps. That's kind of up to you. It's really not a lot different from React on the web in terms of how you might want to factor out different things. So let's set a title here. We'll call it feedback. And aside from that, we want this navbar style, which we don't need anymore. We want that color, though. Let's get rid of all this stuff. Let's put it there. And I forget the configuration name. So under screen navigation options, we can specify the header style. So under header style, we can do I have problem. Title feedback header style. Good call. All right, so now let's make that white. So we can actually just do that with the tint color. Tint color is useful because that'll change the color also of like the back button or other things like that that appear in there. That's actually here. Oh man. All right, so now we have that set up, which is good. But we probably want to just reuse that configuration right between the two, because that's just how we want our everything configured in our app. So let's take that up to this app level and say like All right, so now we just reuse that at the top there. It's useful because you don't want to, for every stack, be like defining these on all of your screens and everything. You typically, if you have a navigation bar theme and like a certain background color or whatever, you probably just want that to exist everywhere. So all I did here was define some defaults and then pass them into each of our stacks as the defaults. And those just get merged in with whatever you specify on the component itself. So you can override it if you want to. So we have some decent setup there. Right, that works. We can add a title there if we want. It doesn't really matter. What's now the most obvious ugly thing is the tab bar. So let's customize the tab bar. Where are these options? Okay, so as you saw on Android, it like appeared on the top. We don't really want that based off of this design. So we're just going to say tab bar position bottom. I'm going to disable swiping between the views. Say swipe enabled false. I can leave animated on. For the tab bar component, I don't want to use the one that's the default Android one that has like a indicator underneath and whatever. I just want to use tabs. Tabs are a perfectly acceptable pattern on both iOS and Android. They're in material design guidelines. It's pretty standard to use just like tabs on the bottom that have icons and some text. The specifics might be a little different, but you can style it however you like. So I'm going to specify a tab bar component, and I have to import this one as well from here. As you can see, the component to use for the tab bar bottom is the default on iOS, tab bar top, default on Android. So I'm just going to import this one and use that. And I think that's a good start. All right. Let's add some options in. So there's this other property on here of tab bar options now. Yeah, lots of words. I mean, yeah, lots of configuration, but at least you can control it. So there are a few things I think that we want to do. We want to set the label style. Right, text is pretty small. Maybe make it a little bigger. In the mock-up, it was definitely larger than that. Right, so make that a little bit bigger and use. Yeah, let's make it a little even brighter than that. Use some color like that. So we could say label style, font size, I don't know, 14 color, like that. Show label, yep. I want to even set the style for the tab bar itself. Has a white background in the mockup, so let's say background color FF. And it's also kind of small. I kind of want to make it bigger, so 55 or something like that. Looks better. Maybe a little bit, yeah, whatever, that's fine. So, actually, that's interesting. Yeah. Let's change the inactive tint color. So inactive tint color is like this tab is not selected, so this style should be applied to the various things. In fact, we shouldn't set that there. So inactive tint color, active tint color. Let's just make it like some kind of blackish thing. So we can see now this one's selected, this one's not selected, switches. But of course, we don't have an icon yet. So the icon's a little bit more interesting in terms of how that is implemented. Where is this thing? Let me just open this other example. So, okay. So the tab bar icon property is a React element or function, so it can be like a functional component that is given these two props. So it's given focused and tint color. And so the way that I did that here to make that render the icons as we want them to is that I created a function that takes some tab bar icon component and default properties, and then maybe that's too complicated. I'll explain that in a second. So there's this thing built into Expo called vector icons. So let's first get it working, and then I'll explain this. So tab bar icon. For this stack, we're going to use the iOS calendar outline. So the way that I'm seeing that is from vector. Oh, I deleted my history. Yeah, this one should work. So it includes a bunch of popular like icon sets, and I want to use iOS calendar outline because that's the one that I used in the mockup. So, right, we can see that's under Ionicons. So let's use that. I'm just going to copy that in. So this schedule stack has a tab bar icon of iOS calendar outline, and it uses the Ionicons icon set. And then feedback stack uses iOS contacts outline. And what am I doing wrong? Oh, sorry, that needs to be in navigation options. Expected thing on 41. Then I have a comma. All right, so we have those two icons in the bottom now. So yeah, it's shaping up. Looks all right. They're not centered, but I'll let you see how I did that when in the other app that I'll show you later. So I'm just going to quickly explain what's happening with this icon component, and then we can, I guess, just have some questions and just work on whatever you want to for, I guess, the remaining 15 minutes or so, because this is all we had planned for today. And we'll be around to help until, I guess, 5:36 or whatever. So what this is doing is, so this is like a higher order component. It takes a icon component and some props, and then it returns that component. Well, rather, it creates a functional component that then returns a React element with that component with the props that you specified should be included on it, and the tint color that is passed in from React navigation. So let me just go back here to clarify. So these are the props that are passed into the component, right? Focus, tint color. But tint color is automatically determined based off of whether, or by React navigation itself. So if it's unfocused, it'll give you the unfocused color. If it's focused, it'll give you the focused color. If you actually want to do something with the focus Boolean, maybe change the size of it or animate it or something like that, the Boolean's there so you can do what you want with it. I can express this in another way that might be clearer, but is not as generic. So we could say this is a schedule icon, schedule tab icon. So this renders an Ionicons with the name iOS calendar outline, size equals 30, and color props.tint color. And I could create a feedback. And I'm guessing I should do that and delete this because I see a lot of confused faces. So I will instead do this thing. Does it need me to pass in? I don't know, something like that. Oops, step props. And what I need to do here is props. So hopefully that's a little more clear what's happening. Basically just saying, given some props that are passed in from React Navigation, render some icon component. And the icon component is just whatever you want it to be. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be, no, it can be like a box. It can be some text, anything you want. And it's given the focused, I believe it was called, prop, and it's given a tint color prop. So then we end up with this. Any questions about that? Nope. Okay, I'll push this up. Wrong repo. Wrong repo. All right, any just like general questions about anything that we covered today? There was definitely a lot covered. You went from being like, hey, here's how you change some text, to like, okay, we have multiple screens and you're pushing them on top of each other and customizing the stuff. And okay. Yep. Tomorrow. Let's have a look. Actually, I can just tell you. So tomorrow we're going over, in the morning, like talk about the architecture a little bit. I suspect people will be maybe a little tired in the morning, maybe late. So, I mean, if you don't want to hear about the architecture of React Native and some stuff about performance, then go ahead and sleep in. So that's the first thing that happens. The second thing we're going to do, I believe, was talk about more APIs. So we focused more on like components today, but we didn't really talk about very much like what APIs are available in terms of like how do you watch keyboard events, or how do you know if your app is foregrounded or backgrounded, or if you have an internet connection or not, some of the stuff like that. We're going to talk about doing animations tomorrow, making a modal, and like using a gesture to dismiss the modal. Kind of, that's the overall sort of plan for tomorrow. Cool. Great.
Did you push all this to Git?
I did, yeah. Yep.
What are your thoughts on the other navigation libraries? Is there anything, other libraries that do things a little bit better, a little worse?
That's a tough question. There's just like there's a split. There's navigation libraries that depend on a whole mountain of native code, And then there's navigation libraries that try to build on sort of lower level APIs and components that are available to JavaScript, and then to build the entire navigation system in JavaScript, which means that you could have, let's say, an app that looks like an Android app running on iOS, no problem. You can share the code 100% between the two platforms. You can push updates to it over the air, and there are a lot of benefits that come with that. Also, you can debug the code yourself probably. If you know JavaScript, then you can read the source for the navigation libraries and understand them. So on one side, there's the ones written in JavaScript, and then on the other side, there are libraries that are written mostly in native with like a JavaScript wrapper. And so they'll have separate implementations for iOS and Android, slightly different APIs, and none of them are particularly mature, but they do like work pretty well for a lot of cases because you're like leveraging this existing API on iOS and Android that like all the apps use on those platforms. So that's a pretty good option in a lot of cases. I think that there are a lot of benefits, like some of them that I just mentioned, for using JavaScript-based navigation. And out of those tools, it's hard for me to say because I've really only used the one that I was largely involved with building along with my coworker, Adam, who isn't here, different Adam. And then we worked a bit with Eric for building React Navigation. I haven't been so involved in that one, but React Navigation seems to be at least the most supported. It's still early, it hasn't even hit 1.0, and there's still some stuff coming for it, but hopefully, if I was betting on one, then I would definitely, and I am betting on one, I'd bet on React Navigation going forward. If you want to build an app right now that works like exactly like a native iOS and Android app, then you should look into the native navigation stuff. If you're okay with getting like 90% of the way there, then you could probably just use JavaScript navigation stuff. But the idea is hopefully at some point in time to have something that feels like the same and looks the same. So, and you'll be able to tell when you use this on your phone, you're just swiping back, it feels a little bit differently and that kind of thing. It's just easier to teach here. And another important thing is that with React Navigation, the plan is for it to be compatible with native navigation APIs. And so I won't go into it in too much detail because Eric is doing a talk about it during the conference. But essentially, you can use the React Navigation API and like swap out what you're using behind the scenes to actually do this stuff. It's like a layer of abstraction over the actual views and the logic that's running underneath it for doing all the navigation stuff. So, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Concerning styling, is there any other technique to have a style more globally? Because as we've seen here, styles are split around application. And wondering, on a big application, it may be quite hard to restyle an app without putting
Yeah.
file.
So I personally like this way of doing it, and pretty much the approaches that are available to you are like very React style approaches. If you find that you're using some certain style a lot, probably you can just pull it into a component, right? So if you have like a card or something and you're writing some styles for that a lot, then just make a card component and put your other stuff inside of it. And then if you want to restyle that, you restyle it in one place. You can, in lots of places, I didn't do it here, but I do it every time I make an app. I make a constants directory, and in that usually put like a colors file, and then list all the colors there. So if you want to change things like that, that works really well. And yeah, it's kind of up to you and to what extent you want things to be shared between different places, how much you want to pull things into components versus, I guess, repeat yourself a bit. But yeah, I think the idea of like global cascading styles, I'm personally not a fan, and so I like the component-based approach and just like explicitly importing the things that you want for it. So that's sort of what I do. Yeah. I guess there's other things you can do in terms of like passing things down through context maybe and keeping, but that all that does really is avoid more imports. So that's, Devin did a little bit of thinking about that. If you want to ask him about his like React style provider, what was it, something like that you were working on, Devin? Yeah, so you can talk to Devin more about different ideas for that. Deflected. All right. All right, then let's go outside where it's sunny and drink some beer or something. See ya.